Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first podcast, JFK, the final investigation. The topic today is going to be did Fletcher Prouty and Oliver Stone try to tell us who really killed JFK? And they would have done this through books and movies and documentaries. I have with me today a very good old friend and neighbor and high school buddy, Mr. John Cady, who's also an author. How are you doing today, John?
Doing very well, thank you.
Great. So, how long have you been looking into the JFK assassination, John?
So honestly, I've had, definitely before high school, probably, junior high. It was one of those things where there was always stuff like that always kind of kept me interested. Like, at first I was hooked on JFK, like everything JFK. My parents brought me to the house he grew up in I think, in Cambridge. They brought me to the They brought me to the library often, and then after a while, you know in all the books we read as kids, that he ends up getting assassinated. But it wasn't until probably high school that I really was like, all right, well now I'm older. I need to know more about this assassination, and it just boggles my mind that it's frightening to just think that can happen to a president.
Absolutely, and it has happened a few times, and we've had a few attempts recently on the current president and also the Charlie Kirk assassination. I'm actually going to do a separate topic on that in a different episode, a shorter one further down the road. But yeah, I got into it when I was 12. My grandfather taught me all about it. I at various times spent more time investigating it. So it's been 38 years, and 2012 was when I really got back into it heavily again. So it's been, quite a long time. There's been some weird connections, too, with my name, Morrow, and the JFK assassination itself. I'm not going to cover that in this episode. That'll be another brief episode I do. But the name is strangely tied, I think, over 7 different times to the assassination. It's pretty wild. But yeah, I had a big interest in it, and it's a concern because, if something like this can happen to a sitting president, it affects, our democracy. So, let's just get into it here. I believe that Fletcher Prouty and Oliver Stone know who the true architects of the JFK assassination are, and I don't believe either of them ever publicly stated their true beliefs. I believe what they did in their books was try to give us some hints and clues without actually telling us, explicitly what their beliefs were. And I'll start by talking about Fletcher Prouty's book, The Secret Team. So first you got to ask, what is the Secret Team? According to Prouty, it was a group of people. Usually it would be some combination of the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the Deputy Director of the CIA. And if you control these 3 people, you can control the foreign policy of the United States. Now, in this book, The Secret Team, Prouty doesn't say a word about who controls the secret team. He just tells you who the secret team is and, how these foreign policies can be affected. So he believed if you had these 3 positions, or a combination of them, you could effectively control foreign policy and even kind of go against the president's wishes, perhaps even in a treasonous way, or simply just by ignoring instructions. So in the book, he has these several references where he talks about a skilled professional, and then moments later he'll start talking about either Allen Dulles or Ed Lansdale, common figures in the assassination, people that have been accused of being involved. So it's a very unique technique of writing where he'll spend a lot of time describing somebody and then go off the topic for a very brief period and then out of nowhere start talking about these individuals. I don't know if any of your writings you use techniques like this. Have you seen anything like that before, John?
No, I mean, maybe if it's in fiction, I don't think you don't pay it. That's primarily what I write, and you don't pay as much attention to that because your mind's not thinking on that level of like I don't want to say conspiracy, but you're not trying to dig deeper on that. You're just trying to be entertained by it.
Right.
So it's one of those things where when your mind isn't that set, right? I want to dig deeper on this, find out everything I can about it. Then perhaps you notice things like that jump out.
Got it. So it depends on the type of books you're reading.
Yeah.
Got it. So, one of the things that Fletcher Prouty stated is that he never believed that he was in any physical danger or harm for the things that he was saying. And the reason he stated for that was that because he never named names. He never specifically named anybody. But, I think that he was trying to do that. And even more so in his follow-up book, which is JFK, the CIA, Vietnam, and the plot to assassinate John F. Kennedy. It gets way more descriptive in that book. But I will just come out and say I believe Secret Team was more about laying the groundwork for maybe some of the people that took more of the actions versus maybe the architects of the assassination. So it was more of a setup for the next book. But I strongly believe that Prouty was referencing the Rockefellers, especially in the next book, as architects of the JFK assassination. I'll tell you exactly why I feel that way. And, do we know for sure about this? Of course not. There's certainly a lot of circumstantial evidence, a lot of smoke there. There's a lot of questions that certainly would need to be answered if they were alive. We don't want to slander somebody and say, hey, you did this, especially when they're past and can't defend themselves. But there certainly can be a case made, at a minimum, that these people were in a position to at least know a lot, and they never said anything about it. So let's jump into the book here. And there's a part where he talks about the United States USSR Trade and Economic Council. For short, it was called USTEC. And there was an article in this journal in 1977 written by David Rockefeller where he makes this very revealing comment. He says that he and/or Chase Bank, which he was CEO and chairman of, had an unbroken relationship with Russian financial institutions that straddles well over 50 years. So that's a period that covers at least 1927 to 1977. So, John, what's the first thing you think of when you hear about an American lending money to Russians at a period like that?
It doesn't make sense to me because, that's during the Cold War. Well, that's actually not, part of it was still obviously allies with them around the time of World War II. So, but
correct.
After that, 1977 is well after World War II, and the fact that we were still, we're supposed to be in Cold War with them at that time, and making those backroom deals is definitely shady.
Yeah. So, the Rockefeller family, they made all their money from the company Standard Oil. Standard Oil, it's well documented that they had investments in oil investments in the USSR. But, to me, I was like, what? Why would he do this? This doesn't make any sense. Not only, shady is one thing, but does it even make sense from a business standpoint? This was our arch enemy. You're lending money to them. What if they tell you, we're just not going to pay it back? Why are you not concerned about that? And, one of the conclusions that I came to is that there never really was a threat from the Soviet Union. There never was a real threat. We go back and look at history and we know that the amount of nuclear weapons that they had was vastly overstated. They were never, they clearly were a danger, but they weren't as much as a danger as the public really thought. And if there was never really a chance of there being a war, then why not lend all the money to them as possible? Let's make some money off this. Let's lend them. Let's let them grow economically, and it's a business relationship. But if you think about what that did to the American psyche during that time period, there's people building bomb shelters. The Cuban Missile Crisis is Another thing, people say, well, that was real. Was it? We don't know. There's a friend of mine who's actually was an intelligence officer in the Cuban military with Fidel Castro. I don't even know if this guy's still alive, but he was in his 90s the last time I spoke to him. But he claims, he's like, we never saw any nuclear weapons in Cuba pointing at the United States. The pictures that we have from satellites are questionable at best whether they're actually nuclear warheads. So, was that incident staged? And, we can never really know for sure. One thing I can tell you, and this would need further investigation, is that oil companies in the 60s, not all of them, but a good portion of them, the number 2 product that they created other than oil was uranium. So what's uranium used for? Nuclear weapons. So if there were tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, that would certainly benefit people selling uranium, correct?
Yes.
Right. So, I've never done any investigation. I don't know if anybody really has into, the investments. It would be, very difficult to track because the Rockefellers had a lot of trusts. There's blind money. It's private. You can't have access to that stuff. But they had vast holdings in military, industrial companies, and banking interests, and you name it. So it's certainly possible that they were profiting from the sale of uranium. I don't know. But it kind of makes sense. And again, no definitive proof here, but it's very questionable when you look back at the activities of the Rockefeller family. Nelson Rockefeller was one of the first anti-communists in 1945. So his brother is, screaming, the communists are the enemies, and his brother's lending them millions and billions of dollars at the same time.
Right.
So what does that mean?
That keeps all of us off their trail.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just really interesting. And Prouty goes on to talk about something else that's super interesting too. Have you heard, or do you remember anything about the Korean airliner that was shot down in 1983?
I know it happened. I don't know a lot about it.
Okay, so the big deal about that airline being shot down, was shot down by the Russians, was there was an American representative, a congressman there, Larry McDonald. I was going to do a whole other story on Larry McDonald. I believe he's related to Patton. He had his own private intelligence agency. He did some of his own investigations into the Rockefellers and some of their shady doings over time. So keep that in mind that Larry McDonald was on this plane. But there was a huge defense bill signed right after this. Very easy to push that past the American public. The Russians just shot down a plane with one of our congressmen on it. We need money. We need to, fight this threat. So at the same time, this conference that I mentioned in 1977 that David Rockefeller was, quoted in the journal on. I'm assuming they had it every year. I'm not sure on that, but this is fast forward to 1983, and 1 month after the Russians shot this plane down, we're sending 100 U.S. companies to this USTEC conference, which is to promote U.S. Russian business. So, again, what the hell's going on? And what would you think if we sent 100 companies, and you knew that at that time, 100 companies to do business with Russia right after something like that happened?
It wouldn't be a good look, which doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't make sense, because, especially, they're making you would think they're making their bulk of the money from U.S. citizens, but, who knows at that point, but,
right.
It's like, now they got those deals going on, so maybe it's like, all right, well, the wool was over our eyes.
Right. So now let's continue on. This is 9 paragraphs later in this book after discussing David Rockefeller and this Russian-U.S. alliance, if you will. And he says, and I quote, "There are major plans, as David Rockefeller notes, and when a Vietnam War, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, or the destruction of a Korean airliner are necessary, They will be caused to happen. They will not be left to chance or the bad aim of a lone gunman in the sixth floor window in Dallas. This is the way things are. Successful men plan ahead. So, what do you think after hearing a comment like that?
That's the thing. Like if this, I'd say like if like CIA or some powerful like that's behind him getting killed, they're not gonna leave it in the hands of one guy, and they're not gonna, they're gonna make sure it's like anything else. They're gonna make sure the job's done.
Exactly. And I found it very odd. Like, is he directly accusing David Rockefeller here? Or is he just saying, is he alluding to how David Rockefeller makes these plans? And now he's talking about the Vietnam War, the assassination of JFK, this airliner going down. Is he saying that David Rockefeller is involved with these things? Or is he just saying people like David Rockefeller do these things? It's just, why even create that question there? Why not talk about David Rockefeller somewhere else so there's no confusion? Why put that all in the same sentence?
Exactly. And I would even so from an author's point of view, like he is saying that, I would say, because you don't put anything. I've learned over the last few years, you don't put anything in your book that doesn't serve a purpose in that book.
Right.
He's not randomly name dropping that guy. That serves a purpose in that book, and obviously it serves a greater purpose than anything I can think of, like writing, making up a story. So it's like one of those things where he's doing something there.
Yeah, it pretty clearly is, and it's pretty crafty way to accuse somebody, like you said, without specifically saying, "Hey, you did this." So here's another one. This is super interesting. What does David Rockefeller say himself about all this? People always say, this craziness, like the JFK assassination, there's some big crazy secret cabal that's involved with controlling things in the United States and the deep state. It's crazy. It doesn't exist. So David Rockefeller doesn't comment directly about the JFK assassination, the Vietnam War, or the Korean airliner, but he does say this, and I quote, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and am proud of it." Have you ever heard that quote before?
No, but all that told me was he cares more about making money than he cares about his country. So,
Correct.
and if you're gonna make a lot more money with a certain person out of the way, then you're gonna do that.
Right.
Especially if you have the means to make that happen.
Yeah, and there was a group called SEADAG, SEADAG, something like Southeast Asia Development Alliance Group, something like that. It doesn't matter. This group was formed mostly by David Rockefeller, and it was a bunch of companies to supply the U.S. military during the Vietnam War, and also a financing mechanism for all these companies so they could, fund all this business. Now, as far as we know, this group was formed in 1964, so it was after the JFK assassination. So you can't say, hey, he, went and, did all this before the JFK assassination, because the group wasn't formed then. But were there any dealings going on? Because usually when you're planning something, if it started in 1964, it might have started in 1962 or even earlier as a idea, and then it's, all right, we're in business now, we just flip the switch and here we go. So that's something else I'd like to see somebody else research more into that organization and, David Rockefeller's involvement there. But yeah, again, it's crazy. He's talking about working against the best interests to the United States, and he's admitting it and saying he's proud of it. Put that together with the comment earlier about funding the Russians, and yeah, he clearly doesn't give a crap.
Right. in
Right.
regards to that last thing you were talking about, there's always rumblings a couple of years in advance of things to come.
Correct.
Just because it officially launched that day doesn't mean there wasn't like you have before you launch anything, you got to plan ahead.
Right. And if there is evidence of that, it would be strong circumstantial evidence that they had something to do with the assassination. It wouldn't, I don't know if it'd be enough to convict somebody, but certainly, again, would be a really, really bad look the way you're benefiting from this and you discussed it beforehand. So now let's fast forward to another part in the book where Prouty is talking about a potential situation. It's like a hypothetical on the plot to kill Kennedy and how it started. But again, he's very descriptive. He says, an elderly member who used to visit the Dulles family in their summer home in Henderson Bay leaned over. And he starts talking about, all this different stuff about problems with military contracts and so forth. It's not super important. What's important is Prouty seems to be talking about somebody very specific. And this elderly member, who is it? We don't know. So I'm going to come back to that in a second, but it sounds like he knows something that he doesn't want to share directly. So back to the Korean airliner. Prouty died in 2001. I have a book. It's a third edition, and it's called Defrauding America by whistleblower Rodney Stitch. And the first edition was in 1993. I don't know when the following editions were. And it appears that Prouty never read this book, but there's a possibility he did because you got a 7-year difference between when the book's first edition came out and when he died. I don't know how active he was towards the end of his life, but it just doesn't appear that he read this book. But if Prouty had, I think he'd be astonished by what's said in there. So what happens is Stitch claims Trenton Parker is a member of a counterintelligence group called Pegasus. They were supposed to, I don't know if you want to call it, spy on the CIA, kind of like be an internal affairs watchdog, keep an eye on the CIA, keep them in check. I don't know how much proof there is that this group actually existed, but this gentleman says that there's tape recordings of plans to assassinate Kennedy. And Stitch asked Trenton Parker what group were these tapes identifying. And Parker replied, Rockefeller, Allen Dulles, Johnson of Texas, George Bush, and J. Edgar Hoover. And I asked, what was the nature of the conversation of these tapes? The answer, I don't have the tapes now because all the tape recordings were turned over to Larry McDonald, congressman. But I listened to the tape recordings, and these were conversations between Nelson Rockefeller and Hoover, where Rockefeller asks, are we going to have any problems? And he said, no, we aren't going to have any problems. I checked with Dulles. If they do their job, we'll do our job. There are a whole bunch of these tapes, but Hoover didn't realize that his phone had been tapped. So a couple things here. Number one, it's hearsay, right? It's what one person said, somebody else said. So it's, not evidence, but it's extremely interesting. You have people that are, again, common suspects in the JFK assassination, supposedly being on tape, talking about the assassination before it happened. And also, Larry McDonald was given these tapes, and then shortly after that, he gets on the airline, and the airline blows up.
Yeah.
So again, what's your reaction when you hear something like that?
It's one of those things. Again, you'd think a recording like that never even got out. Like that's how it, like, on top of everything, these guys seem to be like they're not leaving any stone unturned. Like, that guy's gonna be up in a plane, we're blowing that plane up. It's one of those things where it's surprising that recording even made it out.
Yeah, well, the theory is that J. Edgar Hoover, if you think about it, sometimes it's easiest to fool the people that would never think they'd be fooled, right? Like, J. Edgar Hoover was bugging everybody. He probably never thought there was a shot anybody would try to bug him. So it is almost kind of believable that it was very easy to bug his office. And we know that after he died, people ran to his office and were going through materials and getting rid of stuff. But who knows if that even exists? There's some potential problems with the story. Like, I'm not sure if Pegasus, again, when it was formed, but...
And it could have just been a blackmail piece from anybody. Like, I'm going to hold on to this and not tell the other guys.
Right. I tell you one thing, it's highly doubtful those tapes, if they existed, were on the plane. Like, why carry, like, tapes back in those days were a big deal. Like, why would you carry it to South Korea? It wouldn't make any sense. But if they did exist, it certainly would shut anybody up for the rest of their lives from ever bringing it up again. If you can take down a plane, then anything can be done, right?
And how many people knew that, outside of that circle, how many people knew that Larry McDonald had those tapes?
Yeah,
He disappears. They go in and get rid of the tapes.
right. Yeah, they could have destroyed them, or they might not even have had to. Like I said, it could have been just the act could have been enough to make the people that had the tapes destroy them on their own. Like, this stuff's fire. Like, get rid of it. We're not safe. Who knows? But it's super interesting. Parker had mentioned to Stitch that he had turned over the full box of the tapes, documentation and microfiche for the Pegasus operation in the Caribbean to Congressman Larry McDonald shortly before the congressman boarded the ill-fated Korean airline flight 007 that was shot down by the Russians. So at this time, out of the people on the list, everybody was dead except for George Bush and Nelson Rockefeller's brother, David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller is not mentioned in the tapes, but his brother was, and David Rockefeller was still alive at the time. Did they have anything to do with this plane getting taken down? Did they tell the Russians to shoot it down? Hey, we need some help here. Who knows? Again, speculation, we really don't know. It's just hearsay, but it would be astonishing if it were true. It would basically kind of solve the case. So, again, Prouty never commented on it, so we really don't know his feelings on it. But let's go back now to Oliver Stone. In the movie JFK, keep in mind, JFK was a movie. He came out with 2 documentaries afterwards. People that believe the crazy lone nut theory go off and state JFK is a movie. It's factually inaccurate. Well, of course it is. It's a movie. But I do believe there was some things in that movie that just were extremely telling. Number one, there's the scene where Fletcher Prouty meets the Jim Garrison character. In the movie, supposedly, the Fletcher Prouty character was actually 3 different people combined into one, according to Stone. But a lot of it clearly is Prouty. One of the things, right off the bat, that this character, Mr. X, says to Jim Garrison is, I'm not going to name names or tell you who or what I represent. I mean, that sounds like Fletcher Prouty to me, right?
Right, yeah.
He just said earlier, we know that he publicly stated that he didn't name names, so now he's got a character in a movie that's saying the same thing. So, did Oliver Stone and Prouty intentionally put that into the movie? It looks like they did. And then a few minutes later, Donald Sutherland, by the way, is just the most incredible actor.
Yeah.
He's incredible. And that character he played beautifully. It's sad to hear him pass. Just an unbelievable actor. But he says, and I quote, there was something deeper, uglier. And then right after that, literally in the next breath, says, I knew Alan Dulles very well. I briefed him many a time in his house. So again, what I read into this, is it just coincidence? But now he's talking about briefing Alan Dulles in his house. You go back to his book, and he talks about some elderly member being inside Alan Dulles' summer home. So is he again saying, that this is part of the assassination? Right? What do you think?
I think I'm gonna guess that that Oliver Stone had pretty intimate conversation, a lot. I bet he had a lot of conversation getting ready for this with Prouty.
Yeah, that's actually documented that they did. They did speak quite a bit. He had to for the preparation of the Mr. X character. Again, even though it's several characters in one. And, in general, I know you watched a little bit on Fletcher Prouty. What's your opinion of him?
I think it's his. I'm gonna end up reading one of his books just as a result of that. I sent you that link of the interview that I was watching with him.
Right.
YouTube, And it was just based on that, I was like, all right, this guy has a lot to say, but and he seems more knowledgeable than, I hate to say it, but like even more knowledgeable than someone like Garrison, who I thought always thought had a lot of knowledge on it, but like this guy, whereas Garrison's an outsider poking in, investigating, this guy was already in there. Like
Yeah.
he was around all of it, so he kind of, I put his holds definitely more weight, so that makes me want to read his book more, and the fact that he's sharing everything and he's not afraid to share, but he is withholding names. That means like, he's willing to talk about it.
Right. And it's not a topic for today, but the first book is The Secret Team. Definitely read that one first. It's a little dry, to be honest, but it's super informational. And there's another key piece to it where he talks about NASAM 55 to 57, National Security Memorandums. 55 to 57 essentially stripped power away from the CIA and was a major problem for the CIA. One of the big problems with JFK research is people say, like, the CIA killed Kennedy, they wanted him dead, he was a threat to their power. I kind of disagree with that, and I think the CIA as a whole didn't have too much to do with the assassination, which might sound strange to some people, but I believe there was a faction of the CIA that was involved, and I believe the more important question is who controlled that faction. Was it somebody like the Rockefellers pulling the strings? Was it a group of businessmen? Who are the people actually controlling the CIA? And that's what you really have to look at. Going in and accusing the CIA is stupid. I make this you'll get this one. This is very relative to us, being from Massachusetts. You remember when Aaron Hernandez, who was basically a serial killer, was running around killing people, right?
Yeah.
Do most people go around saying the New England Patriots are guilty of murder?
No.
No. In fact, Robert Kraft was instrumental in getting him convicted. We don't blame organizations that people are involved with crimes. It's the people who commit them. I'm going to do a whole nother topic on why that line of thinking has really hampered JFK assassination research. That'll be a different topic. But back to the movie, Prouty said, or the Mr. X character says, Dulles, by the way, was General Y's benefactor. General Y is commonly known as Ed Lansdale, who would have been more of a person that executed or planned the actual details, the dirty work of planning an assassination. So here you go again with Prouty referencing Lansdale and throwing some shade at him. And again, immediately after this comment about something uglier happening. And then, this is really critical. We go to a scene where there's a bunch of politicians and military advisors talking, and they're having some drinks privately. And we don't know who all these people are. I wish somebody could do an investigation, or maybe somebody that was on the movie set tell who these characters were. The only ones I can definitely identify by their accents, one of them is clearly Lyndon Johnson. The Texas accent's unmistakable. And Henry Kissinger, because that German accent is also unmistakable. I don't know who the other characters are supposed to be, but there's a critical comment that's made by Lyndon Johnson. In real life, I doubt it actually really happened this way, but it's more about the context here. So LBJ says, I want Max Taylor on him night and day, like a fly on shit. Now you control McNamara, you control Kennedy. So why that's so important is because he's essentially saying almost that Max Taylor is a spy or placed there to get information that the Kennedys would not be happy about if it was being shared with other people. And that's important for a couple reasons. Max Taylor was known as the CIA's man inside the White House. He was also very close with Allen Dulles. So was he placed there to get information out of the Kennedys? And the crazy sad thing about it is the Kennedys loved him. Robert Kennedy actually named one of his sons after him. So it's evidence that although I believe Robert Kennedy had a good idea about the plot to kill his brother, he definitely didn't know everything. because he named his kid after somebody that's potentially spying on him. So is it technically spying? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Like, I don't know what you call that. And this is just a movie again. But what this tells me is Oliver Stone got information that virtually nobody knew about back in 1991 when that movie came out. I have never heard a single person anywhere talk about this scene in the movie and the significance of it. It's just not mentioned. But the only person, in my opinion, that Stone could have got this information from is Prouty. Prouty would have been inside. He was a liaison between the military and the CIA, and he would have known or been in a position to know what Taylor was up to. So, again, what do you think after hearing something like that?
Stone did a great job of putting Easter eggs in there for like the normal, like the person who is not as invested in like the Kennedy assassination as like you or you know, I'm not as nearly as invested. Like, I don't know as much about it as you do, but like someone like you and like even someone like me to a certain degree, he put a lot of Easter eggs in there that the average person going to see that movie is not picking up on. So that's why he probably felt safe putting them in there.
Right.
Just
Right.
like when Prouty drops it in his books here and there, like the average, you know, he doesn't say anyone's names. Stone throwing those in there is kind of like that in the sense that like the average person just that scene's gonna go right by them and they're gonna be like, all right, what's the next scene? When something good gonna happen? Meanwhile, you who know about that stuff, you're gonna be like, oh, damn, all right.
Right. I mean, some of it was hinted at the Secret Team book, which was published before that, so people could have known about it, but they might not have made that inference that he was actually spying, and certainly nobody talked about it. It was not talked about. I brought this up to another JFK researcher and asked for his thoughts on it, and you know what he said to me?
What?
He goes, I can't believe you just told me this, Mark. That's right on. There's a new book coming out, and I don't want to steal any thunder away from the author. It's going to be about a different historical figure, but Max Taylor is going to be covered in this book, and there's definitely going to be some questions into the activities of Max Taylor and potentially treasonous activities and maybe more. There's a kind of growing consensus in the JFK research community that they get more comfortable with certain government characters showing some level of culpability in the assassination. A lot of guys, they want to stick to the facts, and I think that's kind of stalled the investigation a little bit. Like, I clearly am willing to speculate a little bit more. I think that's necessary if we're going to, find out what really happened here. Yeah, but we need to.
One of my pet peeves has always been whenever you hear them saying, well, they're waiting until everyone that was involved is dead. And it's like, so you're basically saying like, we don't want to bring down anybody who might have been involved, but like, we'll wait until they're dead to bring all the information that we have out. And it's like, that's just saying like, we're going to let it go, but we'll tell you afterwards.
Yeah, and they probably won't tell us everything because the government doesn't know everything anyways. I mean, there might be, every time there is a release though, there is some good new information that's out there. That's definitely certain. We find out more and more things. Like this guy, Joe Anides with the CIA. He was brought in out of retirement to be the liaison to the Warren Commission. He clearly obstructed justice and kept information from the Warren Commission. He did the same thing with the HSCA. So we're at a time now where it's almost like the CIA is throwing him under the bus and saying, yeah, he might have done this. I actually wouldn't be surprised if the CIA didn't come out and say, yeah, we weren't involved as an organization, but, maybe some of our members in their own capacity might have been involved. If they're looking to hire somebody as a PR person, maybe I'm the guy, but because I don't believe as an organization they were at fault. You can't blame a couple bad apples for the whole bunch. At least in my opinion, that's not fair.
I would be happy even if they just said that. Even if they don't give me a name, if they said, some of our guys might have been involved, I'd be like, thank you. You know,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
more than anyone's. That'd be more than anyone's given. So it'd be like, all right, great. Because
Yeah, it's super
even my
interesting.
even my students when we go over it, like I always go over it with them on November 22nd if it's a school day, and then even they're like, there's no way one guy did this. You know, even teenagers nowadays, there's no way one guy did that. They just by looking at the video, they know.
Yeah, I got a friend. Because of the research I've done, I've become friends with some pretty remarkable people, including former Secret Service agents. And one of them said to me, like, yeah, I don't know what to say other than that's the biggest farce I've ever seen. People thinking Lee Harvey Oswald, did that entirely by himself. You can say maybe he was involved if you want. I don't care about that, but there's no chance he pulled it off all on his own. So
Definitely. So what's your take on him? I didn't mean to knock you off track, but I definitely think he's involved. I think he even fired a shot, but I don't think he fired all this.
I don't think he was involved at all.
Oh.
I think the only question would be, was he perhaps involved in the sense there were a lot of people involved in the JFK assassination that didn't know they were involved. It was very easy to do that. The CIA is very deceptive, and people that commit crimes like this, because it wasn't the first time something like this happened. When I first investigated it, quick side story, you look at who could have done this, it had to have been somebody that did it before. And there are multiple international assassinations that were done of political leaders ahead of that. It's very likely the same people were involved. So, Lee Harvey Oswald it appears that he was working with or for in some capacity for the government. We don't really know definitively, but he was around a whole bunch of characters that had either were in intelligence agencies, were contract agents, or somehow tied to them. So there's a lot of smoke around that. It would have been very easy to say to somebody like Lee Harvey Oswald, hey, we're just gonna fire a shot in the air at Kennedy, and then we're gonna blame it on Castro and use it as a reason to go back into Cuba. And Oswald says, okay, I'm fine with that, as long as nobody's getting hurt. And the next thing you know, there's a real assassination team there, and he gets taken out. But yeah, we'll go on. We can cover this on a different topic. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I don't believe Lee Harvey Oswald was involved at all. One thing I'm pretty certain of is that there'd be zero chance with what we know today to get a conviction on him. There's too many cases of government officials lying and pressuring witnesses. You do that in front of a jury and tell that to a jury. There's no chance you get a conviction. Any hints of witness tampering and stuff like that, anybody that serves on a jury knows that doesn't go over well. So yeah, we can do another one on Lee Harvey Oswald for sure. I want to get back to Nelson Rockefeller a little bit, and there's another book called Clash of Dynasties by Richard DeSocio. He goes way into detail, way more than I have here, about the Rockefellers, particularly Nelson Rockefeller, and some of his activities and why he thinks the Rockefellers were involved with the JFK assassination. It's a very extensive book, and I actually know Richard fairly well. Brilliant mind, and highly recommended book. So, on that, I want to cover a couple other quick things here about Nelson Rockefeller, which is only scratching the surface that most people don't know about. Number one, he was close friends with J. Edgar Hoover, and he was illegally wiretapping foreign dignitaries at the formation of the United Nations with J. Edgar Hoover. So again, these are people I'm going to be referencing who are commonly tied to the JFK assassination. Nelson Rockefeller started the Central Intelligence Agency of the Americas, known as the CIA. It was a predecessor of the CIA, basically a Latin American intelligence agency for the United States. Nelson Rockefeller was close with Allen Dulles, the former deputy director of the CIA, who Kennedy fired, and he was also the most active member of the Warren Commission. You could debate whether Nelson Rockefeller himself was in the CIA or not. I'm really not sure about that. There's a biography on him that states that He used to get very upset when internal CIA documents didn't properly reflect his CIA titles. So does that mean he was employed by the CIA? No, but he clearly had some involvement, whether it was a special project he was working on. There were several government agencies that he was working on that would certainly make him, at a minimum, a liaison to the CIA. So that needs to be researched a little bit further, but he definitely had ties to the CIA. There's no question about that. This is huge. People always say LBJ had nobody had greater motivation to kill Kennedy than LBJ, because he was being investigated for the Bobby Baker scandal and was potentially getting kicked off the VP ticket, the JFK ticket, and was going to be charged with crimes. So he was going to jail if JFK didn't get killed. Well, most people don't know this, but RFK was investing Nelson Rockefeller for nonprofit fraud. And this is discussed in Richard DeSocio's book. It essentially was a situation where you have employees of a non-governmental nonprofit, say the John Cady Foundation, and he's taking those employees and using their time for his political campaigns. Nelson Rockefeller ran for president, I believe it was 3 times, and he was the governor of New York. So he was using these resources in an illegal manner to get himself elected. And the Kennedys knew that Nelson Rockefeller is one of his biggest potential opponents in the next election. They were both fully aware of that. So very interesting there. Also, Gerald Ford. He admitted to changing his testimony while serving on the Warren Commission. A little description of the wound in the neck versus the back. That's obstruction of justice. He admitted to it. So you want to talk about somebody that's guilty of obstruction of justice in the JFK assassination? Gerald Ford admitted to doing it. He's in my opinion, a piece of you-know-what. He's a traitor, and doing what he did is completely unacceptable, and in my mind, permanently tarnishes his entire legacy. The guy's a complete loser, in my opinion. But he later appointed Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. So Spiro Agnew gets, booted as vice president. Ford becomes VP. Then Nixon's president. Nixon has to resign. Ford becomes president. Ford just names Nelson Rockefeller as VP without an election. Now, within 4 months of Ford being president, there were 2 assassination attempts on Ford's life that would have made Nelson Rockefeller president. So 2 questions. Number 1, have you ever heard that before? And 2, what are your thoughts?
I didn't know there were 4. I knew there was...
No, 2. It was 4 months, 2 assassination attempts.
I knew of 1. I didn't know of both.
Yeah, there were 2. So what are your thoughts?
I thought, it's one of those things where, Rockefeller definitely, he's that guy that puts business or puts himself, before country. So he's going to do whatever he can do to get ahead, and that's
right.
He's not afraid. It seems like he's not afraid to do anything what he's supposed to do, to
yeah,
get ahead.
He's ruthless. Most people don't know this. In his biography, he was asked what his greatest regret in life was, and he stated not being president. He wanted to be president bad. So who wanted to be president more than Lyndon Johnson, and who had more to lose? There's only one person, Nelson Rockefeller. Does it make him guilty? No, but sounds suspicious as hell.
Definitely a red flag.
Yeah. And also, there was, you had the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They were investigating. And then there was the investigation into wrongdoings by the CIA. It was all tied to that. And there was a Rockefeller commission that was created to investigate these CIA activities. And they covered the JFK assassination. Most people aren't aware of this. So we got almost like a third investigation done by Rockefeller himself. And he basically said the CIA didn't have anything to do with it at all. And there's no evidence of that. And I forget what he says about there's these guys Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt. I forget what his conclusion was. But in short, every conclusion that Rockefeller made in his commission, in my opinion, is proven to be false. So How did this guy that was so heavily involved in the intelligence community and was running this commission get everything so wrong? Was he stupid? I don't think so. I think he was a very smart guy. So it begs the question, are you covering something up yourself, or are you stupid? It's one or the other.
And someone who's that concerned about his own image and legacy is not going to go the stupid route.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe there's another explanation. I don't know. I haven't heard of a good one. But with what we know about Joanides now obstructing justice, there's no question that the CIA was covering up stuff. There's this talk by people who believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did it and did it all by himself. They call it a benign a benign cover-up. They were trying to cover up other stuff. Like, it's BS, man. They were hiding a lot of information. And this is, again, how people that might not have been involved with the assassination were forced to cover things up. I don't think John McCone, who was the head of the CIA, had anything to do with the JFK assassination. But could he have been forced to cover things up related to the CIA's involvement in the assassination? Yeah, or just look the other way, exactly. Just not ask questions.
Looking the other way doesn't bring any evidence with it. It's just, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, exactly.
It could have easily been like one of those, just don't tell me about it.
Yeah. So, in summary here, I think Stone and Prouty were trying to tell us some things. And I'm kind of mixed about this. Let's just say, for example, that I'm right. Did they have a legitimate excuse to not come forward with this? Was there a real threat to them? And did they do wrong by not just coming out back then and speaking up to what they truly know? I mean, JFK sacrificed his life for us. And, these men apparently weren't willing to do the same, if I'm right. Or do we give them a little bit of slack, because of the threats? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Stone's life was probably never in too much danger, just because people can always, if anyone starts to question it, like, people can always, there's always going to be those people who are going to be like, oh, he's a filmmaker, he made a movie, whatever. But
right.
with Prouty, especially when people learn Prouty's background, then they're like, it's one of those things. If we know this guy's getting closer, like, he keeps throwing those little breadcrumbs out waiting for people to grab at it, and eventually, if we think he's going to throw the whole loaf out there, then, they'd take him out probably long before that loaf got out there.
Exactly.
But, like, again, with Stone, I think they could just be like, hey, it's Hollywood, he's just making a movie that, he's making it a little more interesting for people to, keep them on the edge of their seats. But it's like one of those things where, that he could have got away with it. I don't think Prouty necessarily could have got away with it.
Right. Interesting. So, in summary, people looking to find out more information on this and about the Rockefellers, I would read The Secret Team, even though the Rockefellers aren't covered in it. It's important groundwork. If you wanted to know everything that's going on in the JFK assassination, get up to speed quickly, you read The Secret Team, you read the JFK book, let me go back to the title, JFK, the CIA, Vietnam, and the Plot to Assassinate John F. Kennedy, and read Richard DeSocio's Clash of Dynasties. Those three books sum it all up. I don't waste time with this stuff. Is it a conspiracy or not? It's a conspiracy. I delve into that a little bit here and there, but to me it's an obvious conspiracy, so I don't waste my time trying to prove one existed. I try to prove what happened. But those three books are incredibly important. The guy, the Cuban intelligence agent, his name's Servando Gonzalez, he came up with a book called Partners in Crime. It seemed like he initially was accusing the Rockefellers, but ended up blaming it on the Council for Foreign Relations, which is somewhat of a Rockefeller creation. I don't agree with that summary, but he's in our camp of thinking there's a lot of smoke there. So those are some good books to read for anybody interested to find out more about this angle. I think it's just one that needs to be investigated further. And will we ever get any definitive proof? I don't know, but I do have hope. So, John, I want to give you a quick couple minutes to talk about the books that you authored, entirely different topic, and they're fiction books, but I wanted to give you a quick minute to chat about those for the audience.
Thank you. So I have it's pretty much it's a fantasy series, but it falls under like dark fantasy, urban fantasy, YA fantasy, which is young adult fantasy, and Christian fantasy, which is called Angela of Death. So basically, it's about this girl who she's growing up in, like, everyone thinks Los Angeles. I never gave it an actual area, but they think it's like the hood in Los Angeles. So they're basically, she's trying to join the gang, and then she chickens out the last second. But when she's leaving the house that she was going to be initiated in, she gets shot in a drive-by, and she ends up getting killed. And then when she wakes up, the archangel Michael, he says to her, you're going to be an angel of death, and there's going to be another great battle for great war for heaven, and you're on our team. So that's her whole that starts her whole journey, and the whole series, that journey building up to that big war and everything. And so that's a series I've written so far. And early 2026, I have. I'm also a teacher. I teach incarcerated youth for the Department of Youth Services in Massachusetts. So I have a book coming out full of anecdotes about my students. I wanted to make a book about, like, showing how the good things they do that not everybody gets to see. Like, everyone gets to see on the news how they got arrested, or the fact that they've been arrested or they committed a crime, but no one gets to see, like, the good. No one gets to see them shine. So I wanted to put that in the book. So fortunately, I found a publisher for that. So that's due out in early 2026. That's my first nonfiction book. So.
That's awesome, John. That's really cool. Really cool stuff that you're doing, and it's great to reconnect with you. It's been a very long time, but I'm gonna pay you a compliment here, John. You're a good man. You always have been, and it's a absolute pleasure reconnecting with you here. And I look forward to doing this again in the future.
Absolutely, love to be back on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great night, everybody.